Hello and good morning. Welcome to Dark Thoughts of Hope. This is Teresa Foley, and I am going to be reading Chapter 2 of Lois Duncan's I Know What You Did Last Summer. It was almost dusk when Barry Cox pulled out of the parking area behind the fraternity house and drove through the campus and then north on Madison to Four Seasons Apartments. It was a familiar drive. In fact, he sometimes said jokingly to his fraternity brothers that the car knew it so well that it could drive there by itself. Sure it won't get confused? They joshed back. It knows the way to a couple other pads, too. It keeps them straight, Barry told them smugly. It's a smart little bug. It was true that Helen wasn't the only girl Barry dated, though he was pretty sure that he was the only guy for her. Crazy, too, because living where she did in an apartment house full of single swingers and looking like she did, a living doll, and holding her showy job, well, there were bound to be plenty of fellows howling under her window. There was one reason he continued dating her. He hadn't planned to once high school days were over. A college man had a wide territory, and there were some pretty sophisticated chicks on the university campus. Then, when she had been handed that job as Golden Girl, it had changed everything. A guy would have to be nuts to throw over the Channel 5 Golden Girl. Now, as he pulled onto the Four Seasons parking lot, he grinned to himself. Helen was doing all right for herself. For an 18-year-old who hadn't even finished high school, his mother had fits when she learned about Helen's dropping out at the end of her junior year. It proves what I've said from the beginning, she told him. A person is the result of his background. That girl isn't your kind, Barry. I don't understand how you ever started dating her, which of course was part of the reason he knew it would bug his mother. And then there were her looks. Helen was beauty queen material, and the fact was already beginning to pay off for her. Not many girls her age had their own apartments without even having to split the cost with a roommate. Helen's older sister, Elsa, was still living at home, stashing away half her earnings as a cashier in a department store, hoping that maybe someday in a year or so she might be able to make the break and get her own little hole in the wall. And here was Helen with her own car, classy clothes, anything she wanted, and not a worry in the world. So what had she been so upset about on the telephone? That call had surprised him. Helen wasn't like a lot of girls, always calling their boyfriends. The one or two times she had rung him at home and got his mother on the line had cured her of that habit fast. Even now that he was living on campus, she seldom phoned him unless there was a definite reason. This time she hadn't given one. I've got to see you, she said. It's important. Can you come over later when I get off from work this afternoon? Gosh, Heller, we were just out last night. You know this is a closed week. I've got a whole raft of finals to study for. I told you it's important. There had been an edge in her voice. Something didn't happen often with Helen. Usually if he told her something, she accepted it without question. I wouldn't call you like this if it wasn't. You know that. Can't you tell me what it's about? No. She had left it at that. Just a flat no. He was intrigued in spite of himself. He did have exams to study for, and he had a date later for coffee with Debbie something or other from the Tri-Delta house, but nothing that couldn't be shoved over a little. Well, if we can make it early, he said, right after dinner. That's fine. The earlier the better. She hadn't asked him to eat with her, and he was just as glad. Those domestic evenings with Helen running around in an apron serving pot roast by candlelight were rough to handle. He knew what she was aiming for, and it wasn't what he was aiming for, and the whole game was making him jittery. "I'm coming from the studio," she said. "I've got a DJ show to do in a couple of minutes. I'll see you around 7 then, okay?" "Okay," Barry had said. The conversation had left him curious, so curious in fact, that he hadn't bothered to go to the dining room for dinner. He had just stopped at a burger stand and picked up a couple of sandwiches and a milkshake. Now, here it is, barely 6:30, and he was climbing out of his car and starting up the walk that led past the pool to the steps to the second-level apartments. The pool and the area around it were crowded. The spring evening was still pretty cool, but the pool itself was heated, and there were some polar bear types splashing around and plenty of pretty girls sitting high and dry in deck chairs, taking the first opportunity of the season to show off their figures in bikinis. For a moment he stopped, just enjoying the view, a little surprised that Helen wasn't among them. She had a shape that was better than the best of them, and she wasn't one who minded displaying it. "Hi," called one of the girls, a shapely little brunette in a red and white halter and shorts outfit. "Are you looking for an apartment? There's a vacancy on the second floor." "Nope," Barry replied, giving her a measuring glance. "Not this year, anyway." Actually, he would have given his 18th to be able to live in a place like this. But it wasn't his mother's idea of something the old man should finance. He was darn lucky when it came to that, just to have gotten out of the home and into the fraternity. He went on around the pool and up the stairs, pausing to glance back at the brunette who had turned sideways in her chair and was still watching him. Then he went on down the upper deck and rapped on the door of Helen's apartment. He had to wait a few minutes for his knock to be answered, something that seldom happened at Helen's. Then the door opened and she was standing before him. She looked good, as always. Her honey-colored hair was pulled back from her face and held in place with a ribbon, and the violet eyes were carefully outlined to make them even lovelier. She was wearing a pale blue pantsuit with a scarf knotted at the throat. Evidently, she had not changed clothes since coming back from the studio. "Good," she said. "You're early. I was hoping you might be. I'm glad I didn't disappoint you." Something was wrong, Barry decided. Something was decidedly strange. This wasn't the way he was usually greeted. "What's up anyway? Come on in," Helen said. "We can't talk here." He stepped through the doorway and knew instinctively that someone else was in the apartment. He glanced at Helen questioningly. "Who's here?" Julie James." "You've got to be kidding." He followed Helen into the living room where the other girl was seated on the sofa. "Hi, Julie. Long time no see. How's everything going?" "Hello, Barry," Julie said stiffly. She wasn't as cute as he remembered her, that was for certain. Not that she had ever been the beauty that Helen was, but she had always had enough sparkle so that the lack of real looks went by unnoticed. Now that glow seemed to have faded. Her eyes looked huge in a face that was too small to hold them. "Well, hi," said Barry again. "It's good to see you. I thought you'd kind of dropped us off of your friendship list." "I came here for a reason." Julie's eyes went past him to Helen. "You didn't tell him?" "No, I thought you ought to be the one. It's your letter." "What are you talking about?" Barry asked them impatiently. "What's the big secret?" "It isn't a secret," Julie said shortly. She gestured toward a sheet of notebook paper that was lying on the coffee table. For a moment, Barry gazed at it unseeingly. Then the words took shape for him, and he felt his breath catch in his throat. "Where did that come from?" "It came in the mail this morning," Julie told him. "It was just there, stuck in with a lot of other letters. There wasn't any return address. I know what you did. Barry began to read the statement aloud. That's crazy. That's just stupid crazy. Who would send you something like that? I don't know, Julie said again. It was just there. Have you mentioned anything to anybody? Is there somebody who would know? I haven't said anything. Helen, he glanced across at her. Her delicate, fine-boned face looked as bewildered as Julie's. Nobody. I haven't said a word to anybody either. Well, neither have I. We made the pact, didn't we? So there's no way. It's just some crank. Somebody taking a jab at Julie. They were silent for a moment. Shouts and laughter drifted up from the swimming pool through the open window. For a fleeting second, the brunette in the red and white suit slid through Barry's mind. I wish I were out there, he thought, with a beer in one hand, just kidding around with the bunch of them. If there's one thing I don't need, it's to muddle through a way out scene like this. It must have been Ray. There's nobody else it could be. Ray wrote it as some kind of joke. He wouldn't, Julie said. You know he wouldn't do that. I don't know anything of the kind. You turned that guy off pretty fast, you know. One day you were going steady and the next you didn't even want to talk to him. This could be his way of getting back at you by shaking you up a little. Ray wouldn't do that. Besides, she motioned towards the envelope, which was lying beside the letter. This was postmarked from here. Last card I got from Ray was sent from California. No, Helen spoke up suddenly. Ray's back in town. I saw him yesterday. You did? Julie turned to her in astonishment. In that little sandwich place across from the studio. At lunchtime, he was coming out as I went in. I almost didn't recognize him. He's changed so much. He's real tan now, and he's grown a beard. Then I looked back, and he was looking back too. And it was definitely Ray. He held up his hand and kind of waved at me. Then that's who it must be, Barry said. Of all the dumb tricks, that guy must be off his nut. I don't believe it, Julie said decidedly. I know Ray better than either of you, and he just wouldn't do a thing like this. He felt worse than any of us when it happened. He wouldn't make a joke of it this way. I don't think he would either, Helen agreed. She reached over and turned the paper so that she could see it better. Is there any other way someone could have found out? Maybe by tracing the car? Not a chance, Barry said. Ray and I spent an entire day hammering the dent out of that fender. Then we painted the whole buggy and got rid of it the next weekend. Julie, are you sure you haven't said anything? Helen asked her. I know how close you are to your mother. I told you. I didn't. And if I did tell Mom, do you think she'd mail something like this to me? No, Helen admitted. It's just that there doesn't seem to be any answer besides that. If none of us told, if it wasn't the car, did it ever occur to the two of you, Barry broke in, that this note might be about something else entirely? About something else? Julie repeated blankly. It doesn't actually say anything, does it? It says, I know what you did. So last summer there was 3 months long. You know, you probably did plenty of things. You know what it means. No, I don't, and neither do you. Okay, I have to stop because I'm running out of time. God bless. I love you guys, and listen again.